Hello there, friendos. It's your old pal Chad Dukes, and this is my producer, Gigantor. If you're liking what you're seeing here on the Chad Dukes Show YouTube channel, well, we sure would love it if you'd click like on this video, then maybe hit subscribe. Hit that little bell thing. Isn't that what you do? You hit the bell, and then we spam your phone. We sure would appreciate it. And if you don't want to do that, well, then don't. Those seem to be the options. Take care.
This is Radiofile with Chad Dukes.
It's episode 4 of Radiofile with Chad Dukes. I am your host, the aforementioned Chad Dukes, of course. A radio show about radio, and, there's still a place for that. This concept, actually, was first brought up when I did an interview for a show about radio for our next guest. He has been an executive producer, a host, I guess a program director, all over the place, and he's a fellow Greaseman fan. My buddy Erik Nagel, E-Rock from the radio, is with us now on the hotline. Erik, always a pleasure to catch up with you, buddy. How are you?
Chad Dukes, yaddle doodle die.
I messaged him on Facebook because he has an open Facebook profile, and I offered him.
I have too.
Did you? What did you say to him?
Years ago when I started my my other thing, and I laid it on pretty thick to show that we weren't going to mess with him. And I said, you'll be treated right. We'd love to talk to you. Just go through the history, the grind. Your experience of being pretty much Greaseman is like no other. There's nobody that can say that he was ripping off anybody, and there's nobody that was ripping him off. He was just a unique identity. And he said, love to pal, but he goes, but I don't live that life anymore. All the best.
That's exactly almost what I offered him. Was we were going to do a live episode of Big O and Dukes, and I just wanted to walk him out like as a surprise guest and sit him on the stage for 20 minutes and just talk to him. And I said, look, I was like, I don't know what your appearance fee is. I was like, but we were willing to talk about anything and fly you up here and all that. And he said, thank you, but I don't do that sort of thing anymore, which is weird because he's always posting like Greaseman shtick he's still doing on his Facebook page.
He still does dirty cocktail jokes, like he's at an island in somebody's kitchen, or he's out on a dock somewhere with a drink and a bunch of, upper tier people. And he's just holding court saying, some, horrible jokes, which are really funny. And they put the clip up there, and that's it. That's the only glimpse you get of the Greaseman ever. It's what he wants to show you, and the rest of the world is not privy to his life.
I think it's a really good point you said, though. Like, I'm so influenced by clearly Donna Mike, Opie Anthony, Stern, like the list that everybody's influenced by. But Greaseman, you can't rip that act off. Like, you can't be man-coward, whoever the hell you're going to talk about, Tom Likas, and do the Greaseman's act. And it's so weird and over the top that nobody's – I mean, would you say Phil Hendry maybe is kind of in the same ballpark as far as a guy that like creates his own universe?
Phil Hendry, definitely. For those who don't know, Phil Hendry, legendary talk show host, not in every major market, but, most of the country, would do phone calls and characters, but he was doing it at the same time. If you heard somebody on the phone, he'd hit mute on his microphone, talking to the phone, unmute the microphone, go back into the talking as himself, just back and forth. He's a one-man show. Nobody can do that. That's an old-school radio talent to be able to do that, because they used to go and pre-tape their calls for their characters, have their script, and then just react to the audio tape. And hopefully they got their timing right. He did it live on the fly, which was insane. He's definitely another guy that nobody will ever be that, and you'll never see that again.
Yeah, I agree. And it was weird because Phil Hendry was the show that we took over in Arizona, and I remember listening to him when we went out there to try out. And so he would do this fake phone call bit where he's literally arguing with himself, and his dumbass listeners, they would call in and like scream and yell about stuff that was being said. They had no idea it was a work. So I always wonder, like, what was the time period, like the grace period, where you thought that show was real and you didn't realize what his shtick was? Because there always seemed to be people that were buying into it as a legit show.
I never heard of him until I moved down to Florida for a few years. He was really big down there. And I remember one time he's doing exactly what you said. He's having an argument with a caller and everything. And I guess he's sort of syndicated. I don't know if it was national or regional, whatever, but he had a hard clock. He had to go to break Commercial break goes. It comes back. You hear the bumper, Phil Hendry, the music playing. The call is still going, like he never hung up. Like he didn't reset the show. He didn't bring it back in. The guy on the phone is still yelling, and Phil's yelling at the guy. And I remember hearing that. I'm like, that's something you never hear. That's a bit O&A-esque. That's a bit Ron and Fez-ish to do that kind of thing out of format, and he was doing it.
There's so much I need to talk to you about. I need to ask you about Ron and Fez, because you were there. You were there the whole time that the Fez meltdown was happening, and he eventually retired from radio. You were there for that whole time, correct?
Right. I was there for a little bit of their first time around being syndicated, where they were at NEW at night in New York City, and they were doing Ron and Fez show. They used to be called RonandFez.com. That was their name when they were syndicated.
I didn't like RonandFez.com because I used to run the board for them in D.C. because they would just talk about everybody on their message board, and I had no idea who these people were, and I always felt like I didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah, I think that's why it didn't last too long. They were trying to figure out how to do the syndication thing. They were actually syndicated before O&A was. They were the big thing coming into New York once they got there. Got syndicated at night. They were a late night program, and they would do their .com thing. They did their big ass card holder, which to this day, when you hear people, even on the Bennington show now, when they go big ass card holder 30427, he plays the little sound effect. It's like checking in on your union membership, and it was just such an insane show. Anthony would show up or didn't want to go home at that time when he was still married, and he'd go and drink, and then he'd be there doing radio till 1 a.m, and he started at 3 p.m. East Coast time, and by 1 a.m. he's still there. He just did Ron and Fez, and then he did Eddie Trunk, who was another legendary music DJ and talk host who would come on super late night, and Ant would still be there hanging out. It was just a party. And then when we got to satellite with XM, part of the deal is we were supposed to do this golden ticket thing.
Oh, I remember that.
Where we were going to have fill all the day parts. Like O&A would be mornings, we'd have a midday, afternoon, evening. And we go through the first round of it, and the first no-brainer ticket was going to Ron and Fez. So they left you guys down in D.C. there, and came to Satellite in New York. And then we were supposed to have other shows, and all of a sudden they turned it down and said, there's not going to be a budget for the other things. So they got in and pretty much shut the door and told everybody else that they couldn't come on the system there. Ron and Fez killed it for Satellite. You asked about his breakdown. Ron, you got to give Ron all the credit in the world for being able to take anything, good or bad, and make it into something entertaining and make it into something compelling. If it can't be funny, it can be compelling. And poor Fez if you remember old Fez, he was I hate this term, like a firecracker, if you will. He was very energetic, very angry, quick to rage, very funny. And then he started slowing down, and then he was having a lot of difficulty. And then, there were times where he just wasn't talking. And it was just so sad because everybody loved the guy. Nobody hated him, but it was just sad to see him deteriorate a little bit. And then he had heart attacks, and then his grandmother had died, I think, right before he came to Satellite. I think the audio was from JFK, where he had the big meltdown. He was yelling at your program director there at the time. And I think Ron threatened to hit him with a phone. And, it was just a weird thing. Fez was no longer Fez, and then eventually decided that he needed to retire and took time off. And then he's been making occasional appearances back at Bennington. He made a surprise return 2 years ago at their Thanksgiving show in New York City.
That was unbelievable, yeah.
And, I was there, and I was sending you photos. I'm like, you're not going to believe this. And you go, is this real? I was like, he's right in front of me wearing this Oliver Humperdinck WWF style outfit and doing the old wrestling shtick that he was known to do. And from what I heard too, he's still making occasional appearances now on Bennington. They'll call him up now and then.
He was on last week because Ronnie posted some pictures on Instagram that Fez did not give him permission to post, and then he called into the show. The part where you're talking about where's the Afro shows and all of that to me, that's the pinnacle of radio. But I gotta say, the most unique, what you're talking about, if people haven't listened to these episodes, Fez is insane. He can't speak. He's locked up on the air. Having all this anxiety. And I just remember we would go into work, Erik, and we would sit there and debate whether or not we thought it was a work. I mean, it was just so outlandish to believe that the radio show would legitimately be thousands of callers calling in to give Fez advice, and Ron getting frustrated and cursing. And it is the most unique radio I have ever heard, because it couldn't exist on terrestrial. A podcast wouldn't work because they took 1,000 phone calls. The only place that would have worked is on satellite radio. And I just wondered, what was it like when he was like that and that whole thing was breaking down? Because it wasn't months, it was years that was happening.
Oh, yeah. It started at the XM days, and then after the merger, moving over to Sirius XM. When we were at XM, our office was across the hall from the studio. So you'd come out of the studio, there was a bit of a lobby there. Other side was our office. 2 big glass partitions. We could see into the studio. And for the longest time, Steve C. and myself and Travis and the other guys there, we would sit there and this has to be a work. This has to be something that, because you never can tell with Ron and Fez or with Bennington. He's just like the king of carnies. He's always doing something while this hand's going, the other hand's doing something else, and you don't know what's real. And this whole thing was going on, and like you said, it went on for years. And then you were like, I guess this really isn't a work. Otherwise, this is one of the most brilliant things ever done in the history of broadcasting, to do a 3-year bit. And then eventually he was just breaking down all the time in the office, in the studio. I remember they did a thing back-to-back weeks. They had week and strong week. So Ron was going to let him reset. And he said, you can be here in the studio. You want to talk, you just, take the stick, big cat, and, say what you want to say. But you can be as weak and as frail as you want. Everybody will do everything for you. He goes, but at the end of that week, the next week, you have to be super strong. You have to be there ahead of everybody and bringing, Fez back to life. And week was just really uncomfortable to listen to, because he didn't talk at all.
Right. And
if he did, he was like whimpering in the back, and you just felt so bad. Strong Week came around, and then he was right out the gate. He was trying to do the Ric Flair character that he does, and a few of the other characters that he was doing, and he was going for a little bit, and then it just started to peter out again. And by then, I was like, yeah, this really is a problem. And to the point that management was just freaking out at Ron. It's like, we can't have a show like this. And Ron says, this is my friend, this is my longtime partner, I'm taking care of this, and don't ever fucking question my business.
Man.
And I said, yeah, all right. They know what they're doing. And then when Fez was going to retire and they were going to launch Bennington, at that point, everyone was sad to see it end, but, it probably was for the best.
It went on so long, and it got so bad because, you go back when he was, when Eastside Dave was on the show, he was having issues. And that's years and years before this. The fact that it could only happen on satellite, and it was just nuts, because then I just remember you guys playing the clips on Opie and Anthony of all the mental illness, and then that would just set him off even further. But then Ron would use that as material, and it was this snake eating its tail.
Yeah.
It'll never happen again, anything like that.
I think one of the most infamous ones was blueberries are the standalone fruit.
The absolute best. And then I think you guys spent 45 minutes on that on the morning show with millions of people listening.
We were trying to figure it out, and then somebody on the show realized that if you raise the level up during this one part, you hear the studio door click. Ron got up and walked out and just left him there. So he started doing this bit, and whether Ron was disgusted with it or if he's just going to let him fly solo. So he says the standalone fruit line, and then all of a sudden you hear, like in the back.
Yeah.
And they're like, wait, Ron left the studio. So Fez was stuck in there for 20 minutes trying to do something.
It was tremendous. It's just, I listened to those segments so many times. All right, here's a weird question. How did it end up that you were brought into that show by Opie, and now you don't have a relationship with Opie, and you're working for Anthony, basically running his channel? How does that come to pass?
Yeah, it's like a weird wrestling storyline.
It is.
Ope I had reached out to many years ago and had some sort of open kind of communication back and forth with him. And it got to the point where during the hiatus, they were looking for some more full-time people. And I got a chance to talk with him in person, showed him, what I can do, what I could offer. And he said, "That's great. Let's do this." And, I give him all the credit in the world. He gave me an amazing opportunity. I'll never knock him for that or be unappreciative that he has for what he had done for me. It just got to the point where the last 2 years he kind of changed, and I didn't like what he was becoming and what he was doing. And look, I can only, I don't want to dump on him that much, but he did some things in the last year that just weren't acceptable and weren't cool. And it didn't just affect me; it affected a lot of other people. And he just didn't seem to really care about it. And that just started building a lot of resentment where, for years I was the last guy standing to defend the guy and work with him. And even after all that, there was an opportunity when he was at Westwood One that I was asked if I would come in to help him out, and I said I would. And that got messed up by certain decisions over there. But it just worked out in a weird way because everybody, one by one, was just not putting up with his nonsense. And he just started going in a weird direction and in a different mindset. And there's only so much you can put up with,
Sure. Look, and I only know that from a listener's perspective. And I've told you this, Opie's always been, I don't have I don't know, it's not a relationship, I would say, but whenever we would come up, like Big O and Dukes, or I would come up on your show, you've always been incredibly generous with me, but it was never good, right? Like when other radio shows come up on Opie and Anthony, it's not a good thing. And he was always very complimentary and said nice things about the show when he didn't have to be. So I don't have bad things to say about him, but it's just crazy to me the way that now this whole thing is ended. I heard Anthony say on Robert Kelly's podcast, he's like, "Look, if you got $20 million a year, 3-year contract, would you do it?" And he said, "Yeah, go back right now. Where do we leave off?" Do you think? Right. I get a feeling that Opie would not. That whatever happened is bridged too far with that guy, and even if it was that money on the table, that it wouldn't be accepted. Do you agree with that?
I think as of this time that we're talking, yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. He's got something built into him, into his personality, into his mindset, that you could be 100% right and 100% trying to help and be supportive and do the right thing. And because you told him to do something or you told him he couldn't do something, he has to do the exact opposite. Anthony always brought up the fact that he's walking around doing his podcast. He wouldn't sit in the studio. And I think it's a fair assumption that he said it's because you can't measure him compared to other podcasts and other radio shows, being in the studio, having a setup, having some sort of structure, having your guests come in and doing your interviews. If you're going all over the place and for good or bad, you're just not sounding like everybody else, or you're not sounding like anything else, I think that's a way to hide. It's doing what he wants to do, no rules, whatever, and that's fine. And more power to him for doing all of that. But I think it was a defiance issue that he can't come to terms with certain things. And even if you have the best intentions in the world to help him out, it just doesn't click with him that way. If you say one, he says two. If you say black, he says white. No matter whether it's right or wrong, he has to do the exact opposite. But it's been years since I've talked to him, so I don't know.
What a fan of that show I am. But for you, as someone that's there and you've worked yourself up to a certain point in your career. Producing a show like that, of that caliber, is, how many jobs like that are there on the planet? 5, 6, maybe. And I'm hearing these guys, and they both are doing the "why should I call him" bit. Like, why do I need to call him? It's like, well, you need to call him for the same reason that Axl needs to call Slash, is that unless you're so wealthy that you never have to worry about money ever again, why not just have this conversation, and then you don't even have to do a weekly show or a monthly show. Do a live tour, do a special or something. It's just, I get it. You're at a certain, the fact that Page and Plant aren't speaking to each other and Led Zeppelin isn't putting out music, maybe you get to a point where you don't need to do that anymore. But knowing the success that's there and taking away nothing of what they've accomplished individually and the empire that, Ant's built there that you're working with now, the bit where "why should I call him, he should call me," I'm always taken aback that when people at that level have that conversation.
That's always very teenage girl shit. You know, that's just, no matter how much you succeed or how much money you have, you still have that high school mentality in you that if somebody hurts your pride or your ego, that you're wounded and, you know, they owe me something, or they should call me first. And then, you know what? That's also very old world thinking. Like when you'd hear about your family's fighting, right? If you had a big extended family and said, oh, my grandfather hasn't talked to his brother in 30-something years. Why? And then you find out some, you know, ridiculous misunderstanding or a very minor slight phrasing that was used that they took, like, you offended my family's honor. That's old world thinking. And when people still do that, you go, dude, people say worse stuff to you on social media now on a daily basis.
Yeah.
If you could shrug that off, no big deal. Why can't you talk to this person that you've had essentially a marriage to for 20 plus years? I think at this point, you know, it's been very well documented from all three sides, from Ope, Jim, and Norton, that Norton and Ant still talk and they still get along and they do things. I think Jim and Ant, to some extent, would be open to talk if Ope did a 180 or came around and said, hey, look, let's talk about something. I'm sure those two would probably say yes if he wanted to do it. He can't bring himself to do it because I don't know if he can face the fact that he says it on his podcast. I've heard clips online that he says, you know, I've done some things in the past, and you know, I'm a different person now. Just saying you're a different person doesn't make you a different person. You know, it's what your actions and the making amendments, if you will, to other people, and to say, hey, look, talk it out. Hey, look, we talked, we settled some things behind the scenes. We're not going to go forward, but we're all in a better place. I think besides people wanting to hear another episode or another show with O&A, they would love to hear that happened too.
Yeah.
You know, even if they talked behind the scenes, they didn't really get into the details. They just know it's discussed, because it still gives you a little bit of hope that maybe somewhere down the line, like he'll show up into the studio to say hi, or Ant will go over there, or something would happen. People just need that little potential, little glimpse of hope that something will happen in order to be happy with all of this stuff. Otherwise, they get so nasty.
Yeah, don't you think? I didn't mean to interrupt, Eric. Don't you think also it has to do with? I mean, one of the things that draws you to radio is that you feel connected in the hosts in a way that you're never going to feel with Jay Leno or, you know, Ryan Seacrest or Craig Ferguson or somebody, because they're talking about their lives and it's this expanded long form period of time, and you're able to call them and now tweet them, and then to find out that they can't stand each other. I think it's why everyone went so crazy. Which leads me to this question. Why are the fans of that show, or at least a small portion of them, so nuts? I mean, nuts to the point where what they're doing, you know, on the internet at times seems like it should be illegal, with the amount of hostility and message board. I mean, look, we've had message boards that I've, you know, not gone to because people just, I feel like a message board exists to eventually just start hating the show that it was started for. But the level of vitriol, maybe Stern gets some of it like that too. I've never seen anything like that from O&A quote-unquote fans. Why do you think that happens?
Because, like you said, people become so invested. If you grew up with a show, right, or even not even a show, a talk host or some kind of personality for so many years, you feel like they're part of your life. You feel that you know them personally, and you feel that, you know, if they retired, you would feel some sense of mourning. If they died, God forbid anybody died, you would feel some sense of mourning for that. Like, that's how connected you are to it. So when you find these shows change from what you like now, it's a fair assessment when people are like, you're not like how you used to be. Yeah, people grow and evolve, some for the better, some for the worse. But you can't keep doing the same thing you did 20, 30 years ago and keep coming back and expecting that to be there, like your security blanket, you know, a comfort kind of thing. So when shows grow and evolve and change, you may grow out of it. You may not like it anymore, but then you move on. You accept the fact, this show's not what it used to be. I'm now listening to something else, or I'm doing other things. That's natural, normal human progression. When you expect the same things over and over, that's insanity, and these people turn psychotic because it's a personal offense to them. When Anthony got fired, people got mad at Opie for not defending him. People got mad at Anthony for fucking all of this up. And you could be speaking out of both sides of your mouth at both people at the same time, saying it's your fault because of this, it's your fault because of that. I hate both of you now. but I really love it. If they fixed everything, got back together, a lot of these people, I'm sure you say that are, trashing Anthony, trashing Norton, trashing Opie online with all this stuff. If they got back together, I'm sure most of, not all of them, but most of them would probably start turning towards a 180 to like, I'm going to give this a chance and see where it goes because now I got it back. Like this will be a rare thing if they all got back together. This is what I wanted. I won't be as angry as anymore. It's not going to be all of them, but that's how they take it.
I get that, but Eric, I was a Stern fan my whole life. The show that he does now is not for me. Like the guests that he interviews, the segments that he does, he's aiming for a different demographic. So I don't listen to Howard Stern nearly as much as I used to. I don't then vicious, awful things, about his parents. Just the stuff that I see hurled out there. If it's just butthurt about a show breaking up, like these people need to be in a gulag. I mean, that's the part. Yeah. And maybe it's just because, I don't know, what drew me to the show is, man, just the vicious, over-the-top humor, the cutthroat, the stuff that would be joked about, which you could never get away in 2020. It's like walking past that Mortal Kombat cabinet for the first time in Time Out. You look at it, you're like, oh, my God, I've never seen anything like this. But then eventually become desensitized to the violence in Mortal Kombat, and it's not that big of a deal anymore. I just think it's, 20 years of that, that type of humor washing over these people. They just can't handle it.
It's a weird time right now because it's not just fans who've grown bitter because the firings or split ups or the show ended or any of that stuff. It's not just that. Now that I'm thinking about it, it's also people. We're in a world of trolling where that is an actual thing. If you could get paid for doing that, there'd be thousands of people out there being paid to do this. They troll because that's the only interaction with the outside world really that they have. And I'm not saying, some nerd sitting in his basement. It's these people don't do a whole hell of a lot with their lives. So online, they're somebody different. They can pretend, or maybe that's who they really are, and they can amplify their personality online by being, pieces of garbage, to quote Chip Chipperson, to go after people and just bluntly say the most horrific, horrible things that you wouldn't say to anybody in their face. Some of it even could be like stalking or threatening or illegal or any of this stuff. You have that, but then you also have this other new mindset that came in the last 5 years where everybody takes everything at face value.
Yeah.
And everything is so literal. So if you make a joke, like a diversional joke where you say this, but it's really that, they'll call and say, that's not what that means, or that's not who you're talking about. Yeah, I know, that's the joke. And people don't see that anymore. Or for the majority of people, don't see that anymore. So you got this everything is offensive, cancel culture, take everything face value, literally thing, mixed with the troll culture, the dude bro culture. All these different cultures are just teetering around each other's perimeters. They're almost the same person in different aspects. Everyone just wants to be miserable. And it's so weird because we're in a time where outside of the quarantine or up until the quarantine, we had like the best kind of life in this time period of humanity where technology has never been better. Everything is convenient and easy and deliverable and streaming service. Everything's at your fingertips. Everything's easy. You should be happy, and everybody isn't.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a lot of, to me, it's all about projection from other things in your life that are unhappy about it. You can't be this mad about X, Y, and Z in your entertainment and your diversion.
But think about when you and I were growing up and listening to these kinds of shows. You had Don and Mike in D.C., but,
yeah.
I had Howard and I had Scott Shannon and Bob Grant up in New York, and you're listening to these shows. I would race home from school, and I had cassette tapes on timers on different stereos, taping different times, so I could listen to these shows that I missed while I was at school. It was sort of your escapism, This was something like not a lot of people that I know in school or in my friend circle listen to this stuff. This is something for me, and there's other people out there that might be like me. This is a sort of a club, sort of a mindset, your way to relax, your way to escape, and then it became an obsession, and then it became that once it was gone, you had no identity, you had no self of purpose anymore, so you just turn, evil. You turn miserable because the thing that was, fueling your life right now is completely gone. It's almost like a death. And you didn't mourn correctly, and you just turned very bitter and resentful, and that's what happens with these things. I look back and I go, I remember all the days when I used to, especially if we would travel, I'd listen to radio in different markets, hopefully to find something that might be interesting while I was on vacation or if we're driving through this state and see what's on there. I used to love that. That's all gone. Like I can't even imagine sitting down to listen to the radio at any point, unless I knew of personalities already that I was familiar with or going to give a shot, just to blindly find who's on in the market and find that kind of passion again to sit there and it's like, I got to listen to this show when it's on or download it on demand so I can hear it every day to hear what's going on.
Yeah,
and that's really sad because that was a lot of the fun, too. It wasn't just the shows and the personality. It was the experience of doing it, and that seems to be gone now.
Well, it's funny you say that, and I don't know if it is for talk shows, but I had that experience. It's a weird thing where I was music radio, however bad talk radio is now, music radio is worse. I think we can agree on that. I mean, I don't even know. We were worried back in the early 2000s about them playing Incubus too much, and now there's no rock and roll, there's no hip hop. It's just this product, this pop music schlock that gets put out there. So I was trolling around on the radio.com app, and I was looking, and I found this dude named Kenny Kidd in Cleveland that plays a show on Saturday night where he actually picks the music, and it's songs you haven't heard on the radio in 100 years or maybe never, and he's kind of playing sound effects and being crazy and over the top. And it's a guy like doing a music radio show. And it was so refreshing that now, like, because we're in quarantine, I've been like booting up this station in Cleveland. It's a music show. It's not what you're talking about. But it's funny to hear you talk about that experience because I'm with you. I used to love going into local markets and like flipping on the sports talk station and seeing, hey, who's hosting in the afternoon drive slot. Now it's just ESPN radio across the board. It's interesting to have that experience, on a phone app that everybody's pushing on you. Right.
Yeah, I miss those days because I still once in a while will look and I'll talk to people. I'm like, who's on in your market? Is there anybody worth listening to? And more times than not, there isn't because radio got rid of a lot of those people because they cost money or they just wanted to, strictly streamline a station just for being cost effective, or which is starting to happen, which I had said for years, one day this will be a thing. They're starting to frame it where they can syndicate stations, where you have a playlist that'll play nationally in every market. And when those little triptone things hit, and so you'd hear like, the legal ID and the bumper for the station in New York, station in LA, station in Atlanta, but it would be the same thing. You're just syndicating the station, and they're actually working on doing that. So that leaves you nothing. You can't even program a station to fit the mood of your market anymore. Like a lot of rock stuff didn't work in New York because for some reason New York was always a very big dance rhythmic kind of market. So rock stations were here, but they never really were, that big because the dance music and the pop music was always so huge. Out in LA is the exact opposite. The rock stations were the top. And, you would program to what the audience is and what your market is. Now it's just cut, paste, play this all from one computer. And the reason I figured that out is when this station in New York, WPLJ, got sold last year, shut down, was sold to K-Love, which is a religious company. They're out of California. But what they do is they syndicate their station. So they're buying all these stations around the country and just syndicate the station to whatever market it is. And then at the top of the hour, a triptone thing hits and it plays the legal ID for whatever the station is in that market. The rest of the programming is all coming from this computer in California. And now I'm starting to see stuff online that other companies are starting to think about, like, hey, we could Z100 in New York, the biggest pop station in the world. A lot of the pop stations in the country modeled themselves off what Z100 does, or Kiss FM in Los Angeles. They could go, well, we could just syndicate Z100 all across the country. And instead of playing Z100, it'll play the legal ID for whatever station in there. They're working on that. That's where radio's going next, and that is terrifying.
Yeah, it certainly is. What's it like? What's it like working for Ant now that it's his deal as opposed to when he was doing the show with Opie?
Working for Anthony is a lot of fun because there's still the spirit there of what the O&A show was. You can see in his show some ways that he's matured, in a lot of ways he hasn't, which is good because that's the Anthony that you know and love for the content of his show. But you still have the vibe of that show where you can essentially, if they're talking about something, you can come and interrupt. And you can go, hey, wait a minute, here's some additional information based on what you're talking about, or you got this information wrong, here's what it is. You have that, but it's a double-edged sword because if you mess up, you're going to be trashed right on the air. But if you're correct and you add to it, then the bit goes longer, the conversation goes better, what have you. You have that freedom, which you don't have in radio anymore. And podcasting doesn't feel the same. When you do that kind of thing, there's not that element of being live, right? So if something goes astray, either people don't care to edit it, they don't care to correct themselves, so whatever you said is what's going out, or they go and they edit it and you never hear the mess up. You never hear something that gave that live element, that gave that rawness of radio, where you're listening to a show and you go, oh my God, I can't believe he messed up, or I can't believe they played that, or I can't believe this happened. That Anthony still and Compound Media still embody that, where the shows are, for the most part, are live. A little different now during quarantine, but for the most part they're live. You still have that element if something messes up, or if a caller is horrible, or if a caller is great. Everything's still a surprise, and everything's still exciting to see how it plays out. And that's one of the reasons I love working there.
Yeah, it's a unique thing that you guys have built over there. All right, I
already told you, you guys, if you worked on getting a video element, we'd love to have you.
We'd love to be a part of that. It's sticky right now with Entercom, and it's just tough. It's tough to look. I'm in a lucky spot where I can do stuff like this. I can do stuff like Big O and Dukes, but most people that are, contractually obligated, first of all, this, Eric, they're not giving out a lot of contracts anymore, these radio companies. They're so sensitive, I think, because there's way too many outlets and there's not enough content. You know what I mean? There's just not enough people that can physically do it. And I think that's why you see Spotify paying $100 million for Joe Rogan right now.
Yeah. It's, very shades of Howard back in the day.
Yeah. Dude, I think I don't mean to interrupt you. I think it's even more impressive simply because there's so many more. When satellite radio first started, there weren't a billion podcasts. You know what I mean? There wasn't Barstool and all these different outlets. And Rogan has risen to the top when there's a billion voices and everybody's on Instagram Live. Everybody has a podcast, and he still has achieved this level. I mean, no disrespect to Stern, but I think it's actually more impressive.
But keep this in mind. Back when Howard was moving over to satellite, we had already moved over there.
That's true.
At least 2 years before that, right? But he's the bigger name, so they get that gets the attention. But we were the first ones to go over there in that situation, to leave terrestrial and go over and try to make satellite work. When he did it and they gave him that deal and all that money, it was to bring him over there. It was to lock him in for 5 years. It was also to have him develop a couple of stations and some offshoot programming. And then he had the Howard 100 News. He had all these different elements going with it. I think Joe could do the same thing, because Howard moved over there. There was all these radio shows, all these radio stations, and you would say, oh, there's a billion radio stations and a billion radio shows out there. Why would you need to pay for him on satellite, right? So same thing with Joe. Like you said, all these other podcasts, he's risen to the top. If you go over there, why would you need to listen to him there? Well, it's a platform. They're developing a video element for him, which they didn't have. They're making a ton of money just from the announcement that the contract they did. Their stock shot through the roof, and they're trying to change the playing field with this. So if you can go to Spotify right now, because they're already taking a chunk out of between Spotify and Apple Music, they're already taking a chunk out of SiriusXM for not having to sit to listen to a playlist. You can make your own playlist and all your own music stuff and do what you want. Satellite still gets performances, and maybe they do guest DJ stuff, but as far as listening to a music channel, I don't know why you'd listen to anything like that if you can program your own thing.
Yeah.
He goes over there. He becomes the top dog for all this stuff. What's to stop them? Or maybe it's in the works where they're like, hey, you know what? We're going to develop a Joe Rogan network on Spotify. So Joe brings in some of his friends for their podcasts and or different projects to go under him. And then they develop this whole personality base that doesn't exist anymore. Sirius had it for a little bit, but nobody's talking about their stuff. You hear Bennington, you hear Mad Dog, you hear Howard, but that's about it. So if Joe can go in there and start bringing in, Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer and maybe some other people too, and they build a talk branch network, a podcast thing like there, that's as close as we're going to get to the old FM hot talk style stuff. So it's interesting to see, once this thing goes exclusive at the beginning of next year, I'm hoping Joe does something like that, where he develops a network, brings other people in there, people maybe even giving people news. Maybe he does a golden ticket kind of thing, brings other people in there. Who knows at this point? But it's exciting to see that there's possibility and that there's hope for the format and the style of broadcasting that you love, that I love, that your listeners love here, to maybe have another heyday, another golden age with who we'll see what Joe does and if something can come out of it.
The greatest segment in the history of radio, in my opinion, is Steve Carlisi taking Mondays off for the foreseeable future. I don't know if you how clear is your memory of that whole. First of all, Steve C was a 10 out of 10. Another guy that I interacted with him maybe 3 or 4 times was a mensch. Could not have been nicer to me. He's passed away, unfortunately. But his ability to go from 0 to 100, but then also wanting to physically assault everybody, but not being able to. I mean, he was just such a unique character. And then that whole series of events where he had all those days off and was trying to take that was some of the best fighting on the radio I've ever heard in my life.
All right. So with the Monday thing, so here's what happened. Yes, what you said about Steve, he was a unique character, very lovable, but could go from 0 to 1,000 at the drop of a hat.
He was nuts.
Yeah, Steve was nuts. He had some, emotional issues, but all in all, Steve was a very sweet, caring, loving guy, great father, and a good husband and all of that. Just was not meant to be the executive producer of the show, and he got put into that spot out of necessity because they had fired the previous executive producer and they needed somebody. Steve was great at production. Steve was great as a side character. He was great at all those other things. The EP position was just not – he did his best, but it was not for him. They should have just moved him back to production, but – other things were in play, and then they wound up letting him go, unfortunately. Now, for the foreseeable future, after the merger, the employees from XM were labeled XM Legacy employees for about a year and a half because they still had to hold some of the agreements up that XM had, even though the merger was done and we're all one company. So we were an XM property. We had all these, in our contracts and agreements and everything, we had more time off than shows normally would do, especially the staff. The rule was if the show was off, the staff was off, right? So they couldn't do anything until those deals expired and they had to reshape it for SiriusXM. So we had all these days off, and we were told to use them whenever we want. We are not to, if we can take off with the shows off, that's fine. But if you're running out of time, you're not going to get paid for them. They're going to expire after a year. You need to use all your time. So they told us that late in the year. I think it was like 2010, if I'm wrong, but I think it was around that time that we needed to do this and we were going to run out. So if Steve had taken all his days off, he would have been gone from around Thanksgiving and come back in January. That's how much time off he had. So he just said, you know what, I can't do that. I'll break it up and I'll just take a day off every week to work all this stuff off. So he took about 1 or 2 weeks off, and then he had told us what was going on here because he was trying to get us to sort out our vacation schedules. And then when it was brought up, something happened. It's like, where's Steve? And it's like, oh, he's off today. And I think Ope said, he goes, what? He's always off. What's going on here? And I had to tell, it was either me or Sam, had to tell them that Steve's policy, where he came to us, the staff, and told us that he was going to be off for the Mondays for the foreseeable future because he had to use all his vacation time. So he just decided, I'll just take Mondays off. Instead of taking like 3-day weekends or maybe a week here and there, I'll take every Monday off. And then Ope said, you can't do that because we're functioning, not just a show, but we were a department for the company. You have to be here for this. You're the executive producer. And they called him on the air, and that's where the whole thing went into overdrive about taking Mondays off for the foreseeable future, and became one of the best things on O&A was that you'd have slug lines, little catchphrases that really made and described a character and made you very cartoonish. So it kind of took the human element out of you so that it wouldn't sting as much. You were more of a character, if you will. But to have Steve go, I'll be out for the foreseeable future just became a long-going joke until he left. Between that and then he couldn't make it in because of a snow day because his Prius couldn't drive in the snow, or one of the two funniest things that I think he ever unintentionally did.
When you were taking pictures of his breakfast, and then he went nuts, and then Patrice was in. and you guys did Apocalypse Now and Jaws lines making fun of Steve's breakfast. I'm not kidding you, for 2 hours. Like there was nothing funnier than taking something that really wasn't that big of a deal and just ruining somebody for 2 hours because of it. It was so needlessly cruel. I would just sit there and laugh with my teeth out.
Yeah. It was weird too, because Steve he worked out a lot, but he always yo-yo dieted. Like, he was doing well for a while, and then he'd go back into lazy health habits where he'd be eating good, he had his food prepped and planned and what have you. But then we're getting cases of Monster Energy drink sent to the studios that none of us are drinking. He's drinking it, and then he's also drinking, like, a couple bottles of Diet Mountain Dew at the same time. It's like, Steve, you're just nonstop caffeine. He's eating all this healthy stuff, and then I started taking photos of his breakfast because one day he had lasagna, and the other day he had a cheeseburger. Like, he sent an intern down, they made a cheeseburger in the morning, and it's like, what are you doing? So exactly what you said. It was something that was just supposed to be a little nudge to, like, what is he doing? Because I used to get, shit all the time I enjoy, treats. Who doesn't like to treat themselves? That was another thing on the show. So I'm like, oh, Steve does too. And then exactly what you said, it just became a big deal for no reason. And those were usually the best parts of the show, because either there was a heavy news day or a light news day. And if we can be silly rather than be serious, that's exactly what we did.
Well, I always remember one of the things that Gary always says on Stern is, if there's no guest, then somebody's going to be in the crosshairs. And I never felt like that was the case with O&A, and when you guys would have one of these blow-ups, is it wouldn't just be because there's nothing else going on. The ability to mix the shtick and then the actual anger and then the drops, the sound clips as well, it was just unprecedented. Like, there's probably – it was fighting, I think, probably at the finest it's ever been on the radio.
One of the best things was that we had the ability – the way we had the computer set up is that we could actually go back – past 30 seconds to what you just did on the air and replay it. Now, stations weren't built that way, but we had it built in that way, that we had a delay for ourselves so that we could actually go back and hear it. So if somebody made a noise or somebody screwed up a word or something happened while everybody else was talking, you miss it, you could go back and isolate it and you play it back again. And then then you're hearing that for an hour. Like, there'd be a part where we had an interview and then we didn't notice it, but then come back from break and Jim said, oh my God, I can't believe I farted in front of her. He's like, no, you didn't. And we'd play the audio back and she'd be saying something. You'd hear a fart in the background. And that was Jim. And that was one of the best things to ever have with that show. Because if you said something, you did something, you wore, oh my God, another Steve bit. He wore woman's capri pants, right? He came in with these jeans. They were capri pants. They just ended right under his calf, and they had some kind of like flower embroiderment on the bottom. And he was swearing that these were guys' pants, that his chick bought them for him. And we're sitting there like, all Steve needed was culottes to go with it. These were girls' pants. So if you wore the wrong thing, that turned into a whole bit.
I remember you wore the shirt in for what was it, the movie that Chris Rock was filming his movie there. They gave you the business for 47 minutes for wearing from what I recall, you were wearing a golf shirt, like just a collared shirt into work.
It wasn't a shirt for the movie. It was like, hey, they're going to be taping stuff here. Maybe I just won't look like a slob like we always did, T-shirt and jeans and stuff. So I wore it wasn't that far off from what I would normally wear, but I wouldn't wear it to work is the thing. So yeah, I just had like a polo golf shirt on with and had my hoodie. And Sam made it a big deal that I dressed up for this thing, and then they brought Chris in on it. Chris is a comic, Chris Rock. So he's rolling his eyes like, yeah, you think you're getting into this? I'm like, I wasn't planning to get on it. Like, I was dressed up because this was going on. So if we were in the background, I wanted to at least look nice. I don't think anybody would have done it, but I get why they were making fun of me because that wasn't something I normally would wear.
It's able to turn that. I mean, it's not even capris. It's a golf shirt into like 45 minutes of shtick, which is just.
Oh yeah.
That's the best.
We were all the worst human beings. The worst.
You're doing your own shows now, which is very cool. And you can check those. I linked them, by the way, to the Radiofile Twitter. If people are following us at Radiofile Show, I have them up there. But it's Erik Nagel and Would You Kindly. Very cool. It seems like you've transitioned nicely from in front of the microphone to behind the microphone.
Part of it was desire, part of it was necessity.
Yeah.
I got to start the It's Erik Nagel show on the Opie and this was weird. I started my show on the Opie and Anthony channel in 2014. Opie was constantly pushing. He's like, if you want to do something great. And I just never took advantage of that because I was taking enough heat doing the O&A show and then stuff behind the scenes. I was always busy. And then finally I said, you know what, screw it. I'm being given an opportunity. I should do this. So I started to do it. Launched it. 2 weeks later, Anthony's fired. So I was on the O&A channel technically for 2 weeks, and then Anthony got fired. And then it was the Opie radio channel for the rest of the time, and got to do it there for 3.5 years. And then when we left there, we got picked up by iHeartRadio right after I left Sirius. We've been on there ever since. And by the way, the iHeartRadio app has a rewind button. Did you know about that?
I've heard that. That's been mentioned a time or two, maybe in these waters right here.
Yeah. So they have a rewind button, which is a very impressive feature. But you can find that show. And I'm doing what I love to do, whether people want to listen to it or not. I hope you'd listen. But I'm doing the thing that I grew up listening to different styles in New York and some stuff nationally. And I think there's still a way to do all of that stuff. You don't, whenever you say, cheesy morning zoo kind of radio, that's not even a valid reference anymore because morning zoo radio stopped at the end of the 90s, But to go back and look at why that stuff was successful and you go, well, look, they were very well produced. Their production was top quality. All right, nothing I could take from that. Oh, look what Howard was doing. Look what O&A were doing. Off the cuff, being real, having legitimate discussions. I could do that. Oh, look what this show was doing there. They did this kind of thing. All right, I could do that. And you just take from what you know and make it your own. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad. And if you do it long enough, eventually everything comes in a circle. And then they look at. I've had people go, the imaging on your show is amazing because podcasts don't have imaging. Right? Even radio shows now don't have imaging.
Yeah. That's
really, thought out and storytelling and clips and all that stuff. I still do that. I learned a lot of that from Steve C. about, telling a story with production and then, getting libraries and connecting to the right people. I like taking these old familiar elements and putting it into a show now, and hopefully other people recognize it and go, oh my God, I remember when shows used to do this. Or, oh my God, I've never heard a show do this now. This sounds amazing. I just do it because I love radio. I want to keep doing radio, and then sort of like a honor and homage all the other people that paved the way for what you do, for what I do, for other people do now. We're the last guys to do this kind of stuff, and I just love doing it and having a lot of fun.
It's Erik Nagel. Check the show out. Of course, you can follow E-Rock on Twitter at E-Rock Radio and on compoundmedia.com. All of the content is there. Full hour in the books, Erik. I feel like we could definitely rev this back up for a part 2. Always want to say thanks for the idea for this show, and then also thank you for coming on the show. I greatly appreciate it.
After you've listened to all of the radio files with Chad Dukes, you could look for the Radio Inquisition online. Similar, but not.
Yours actually is a lot of preparation, a lot of production. I just wish you would release more of them. I wish you'd stop sequestering them away in a tomb like those big crates at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark, for God's sake.
Hey, if I learned anything from Prince is that it's all mine and none of your business. No, there's actually 3 in the works right now that are going to be coming out fairly soon. The reason, actually, I got to give a lot of credit to you, is one is that you told me you were going to do this show and, it was similar but not, like I said, similar but different to what I was doing, and you asked if that was cool, and I said, yeah, go ahead. I wouldn't step in your way for all of that, but it kind of lit a fire under my ass, too. And he goes, you know what? He's right. I should put a lot of this stuff together. And look, I've been busier than I've ever been during this quarantine period with work and everything else that's been going on, but I've been restructuring some things. I was like, I'm going to put these out. People will enjoy these. They're a lot of fun. And I also I'm going to kiss your ass for a little bit here at the very end of this. So there's not a lot of shows to listen to. I've been listening to Big O and Dukes for, almost 10 years now. I gave a lot of credit to our old production guy, Derek Blair, who lived in D.C., who listened to you guys on the radio and turned me on to you guys.
That's awesome.
I still listen to your show, and I've been listening to Chad Dukes vs. the World, and I've got to say, you're the perfect person on a sports station for when all the sports went away. Other people were freaking out, like, I don't know what to talk about, whatever, and I go, this is going to be Chad's heaven, because he doesn't have to talk about the thing that he hates and he can do everything else. I heard you one day, you were playing classic rock music and trying to change the format of the station, which was hilarious because that's something we did years ago when we killed off K-Rock and flipped the format without the company knowing. And it was our last day there, by the way. We switched K-Rock, the New York rock station, into 92.3 Now, which is what it is now, or was at one point. Yeah. But we did it before them. We found out they were going to do it, and we didn't let anybody know. And then we re-imaged the station, and it took about 12 minutes before the company even realized we did that, and then somebody called over and yanked the feed off a major New York station. You can find that clip online. But you were playing classical music. You were calling. I forgot what you changed the name of the station to.
The Arrow.
And then you were taking requests.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was laughing. I was laughing my ass off. Like, nobody does this anymore. This is the silliness, the what you want from talk programming and talk radio and any kind of personality programming. So
I hope sports never comes back. To your point, I'm having too much fun right now.
Yeah, don't come back. Do all the silly stuff. You know, I know you used to do the Ska Wednesday things.
I still do. But I'm still
you're doing your classic rock stuff. Yep. I enjoyed you were doing a crock pot Friday where you're just cooking fatty foods for your whole crew. The radio doesn't need to hear that, but you're like, I don't give a shit. We're going to talk about chili right now.
Yeah, chili's way more interesting. The middle relief pitching, yeah.
So props to you for doing what you do, man.
Thank you, Eric. That is very kind. I have a lot of respect for you, and you have a lot of radio acumen, so that means a lot, and I appreciate you coming on Radiofile. We'll have to get together for part 2, all right?
Yeah, we'll do.
Excellent, my friend.